My name is Cassian Drummond. I'm 62 years old, and until recently, I was a vice president of operations at Meridian Roake, a mid-sized logistics supplier headquartered in Baltimore, Maryland. For 30 years, I built that company from the ground up. I led their expansion across the East Coast, streamlined their supply chain operations, and kept them profitable even during the 2008 financial crisis and the pandemic disruptions that killed dozens of our competitors. I've always been the analytical type, quiet, methodical, strategic. Nothing happened in our warehouses, distribution centers, or transportation networks without me knowing about it, and more importantly, without me documenting it. That attention to detail wasn't just professional habit. It was survival instinct in a business where one miscalculation could cost millions. The betrayal didn't come during a formal meeting. It came as a casual announcement in our internal company's Slack channel on a Tuesday morning in February 2024. Congratulations to our new VP of Operations, Riven Kade. Just like that, no prior conversation, no warning, no explanation. The owner's son had been handed the position I'd been grooming myself for over the past 5 years. If you enjoy stories of cold-blooded revenge and gripping plot twists, like this video and subscribe to the channel now. There are brand new unreleased stories here every day, each one more intense than the last. I stared at that message for exactly 30 seconds. Then I closed my laptop, walked to the break room, poured myself a cup of coffee, and went back to my desk. My colleagues expected an explosion. They expected anger, maybe even a resignation letter thrown on Graham Cade's desk within the hour. Instead, I did what I always do when faced with a problem. I observed. I analyzed. I waited. Riven Kade was 29 years old with a history of impulsive decisions and scandals. That daddy's money had quietly swept under the rug. A DUI in college that disappeared from court records. A failed crypto startup in Austin that left investors holding worthless tokens. A brief stint at a consulting firm in New York that ended abruptly, officially due to restructuring. But I'd heard whispers about inappropriate conduct with clients. The official justification for his promotion was corporate vision renewal. In plain English, that meant nepotism wrapped in corporate buzzwords. But as I watched Riven settle into his new role over the following weeks, I noticed something that bothered me more than the injustice of being passed over. The patterns didn't add up. Within his first month, Riven began making operational changes that made no sense from a logistics standpoint. He altered established shipping routes that had been optimized over years of testing. He approved new suppliers without proper vetting, companies I'd never heard of with addresses that led to strip mall mailboxes. He prioritized urgent deliveries that lacked complete documentation, claiming they were special contracts his father had personally negotiated. I'd built my career on understanding supply chain efficiency. These weren't the moves of someone trying to improve operations. These were the moves of someone with a hidden agenda. And that's when I realized the betrayal was just the beginning. Something much bigger was happening at Meridian Roake, and I was going to find out exactly what it was. Instead of confronting Riven directly or complaining to HR like everyone expected, I decided to conduct my own investigation. 30 years in logistics had taught me that the most dangerous problems are the ones hiding in plain sight. While my colleagues assumed I had accepted the corporate decision and moved on, I began documenting everything Riven touched. I started small. I created backup copies of shipping manifests, invoices, and delivery confirmations for every unusual transaction Riven approved. I installed redundant GPS tracking on our fleet vehicles, telling our drivers it was for enhanced security protocols. What I was really doing was mapping every route, every stop, every deviation from standard procedures. The patterns became clearer within weeks. Riven's priority shipments followed specific corridors. Baltimore to Richmond, Virginia. Baltimore to Lexington, Kentucky. Baltimore to Albuquerque, New Mexico. These weren't random routes. They formed a deliberate network. The cargo manifests listed medical supplies, pharmaceutical equipment, and hospital-grade chemicals. Nothing illegal on paper, but the delivery addresses told a different story. I spent my evenings cross-referencing these addresses with business registrations, property records, and DEA databases I could access through my professional networks. What I found made my blood run cold. Half of these medical facilities were shell companies registered to P.O. boxes. The other half were legitimate businesses, but they were receiving shipments far exceeding their documented capacity or stated needs. A small family clinic in Richmond was somehow ordering enough fentanyl precursors to supply a major hospital. A pharmacy in Lexington was receiving industrial quantities of chemical solvents with no retail justification. A medical research facility in Albuquerque turned out to be a converted auto repair shop with no visible staff or equipment. I needed expert confirmation, so I reached out through a contact I'd maintained since my Army Reserve days, a retired DA agent named Patricia Hawkins, who now worked private security. Without revealing my company's involvement, I described the shipping patterns and asked for her professional opinion. Her response was immediate and chilling. "Cassian," she said during our phone conversation, "what you're describing is textbook money laundering connected to synthetic opioid distribution. Someone's using legitimate logistics infrastructure to move precursor chemicals and wash drug profits through fake medical suppliers. This isn't small-time operation. This is organized crime with serious federal implications." That conversation changed everything. I wasn't just dealing with corporate nepotism anymore. I was sitting on evidence of a multi-state drug operation that was using my company, the company I'd built, as its distribution backbone. And Riven Kade wasn't just an incompetent heir. He was a criminal using Daddy's business to facilitate narcotics trafficking. I expanded my investigation methodically. I traced the financial flows through our accounting system, identifying payments that didn't match standard industry rates. I documented every conversation, every email, every seemingly innocent request that Riven made. I started staying late, not to work overtime, but to photograph documents and copy files without triggering the IT security protocols. The scope of the operation became clear over the next 2 months. Meridian Roake was moving approximately $2.3 million worth of suspicious cargo per month across state lines. The shell companies were paying premium rates, sometimes 40% above market price, for shipping services that should have cost a fraction of what they were being charged. That premium was how they laundered their drug profits, overpaying for legitimate services to clean dirty money. But Riven wasn't working alone. As I dug deeper into email archives and financial records, I found evidence that Graham Kade, the CEO and Riven's father, was fully aware of the operation. There were encrypted messages discussing special contracts and alternative revenue streams. There were meetings with individuals whose names I recognized from FBI most wanted lists. There were bank transfers to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands in Switzerland. The Kade family had turned my life's work into a criminal enterprise, and they'd stolen my position to protect their son's role as the operational mastermind. But they'd made one critical mistake. They'd underestimated the man who'd built their logistics system in the first place. I knew every route, every protocol, every weakness in their operation, because I created those systems myself. By late June 2024, I had compiled 147 pieces of evidence, financial transactions, shipping records, GPS tracking data, email communications, and photographic documentation. I'd also established contact with 3 different federal agencies, the DEA, FBI, and Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. But I wasn't ready to move yet. I needed the perfect moment, a time when the impact would be maximum and the escape routes would be minimal. That moment came when Graham Kade called an emergency board meeting for July 15, 2024. According to the agenda, they were planning to discuss operational restructuring and leadership optimization. Corporate speak for pushing me out entirely and giving Riven complete control. They thought they were eliminating the last obstacle to their criminal operation. Instead, they were walking into a trap I'd spent 5 months preparing. On July 10th, 5 days before the board meeting, I submitted my resignation letter to Graham Kade. It was a single page, professionally worded with 2 weeks' notice, as required by my contract. But attached to that letter was a simple addendum available for consultation with federal authorities regarding operational irregularities observed during tenure. Graham called me within an hour. His voice was strained, trying to sound casual. "Cassian, this resignation seems sudden. Is there something we can discuss?" Perhaps we can find a role that better suits your experience and observations. I kept my response measured. Graham, after 30 years, I've decided it's time for new challenges. The transition should be smooth. I've documented all current operations thoroughly. The word documented hung in the air like a threat, which is exactly how I intended it. I could hear him swallow hard before he ended the call. Over the next 3 days, my phone rang constantly. First Graham, then Riven, then members of the board I'd worked with for decades. They offer consulting contracts, bonus packages, even a seat on the board of directors. Each conversation followed the same pattern, increasingly desperate attempts to keep me close and quiet. Riven's approach was different. He showed up at my house on Saturday morning, July 13th, with coffee and pastries from my favorite bakery on Charles Street. He was trying a friendly, personal touch. "Look, Cassian," he said, settling into my porch chair uninvited. "I know the transition has been awkward. Maybe we got off on the wrong foot. I'd really value having you as a consultant. Someone with your experience could help me avoid mistakes." I sipped my coffee and studied his face. He was scared, trying to gauge exactly how much I knew. "What kind of mistakes are you concerned about, Riven?" Operational stuff, route optimization, supplier relations, regulatory compliance. He emphasized the last phrase, watching my reaction carefully. Regulatory compliance is important. I agreed, especially when dealing with controlled substances and interstate commerce. The penalties for violations can be severe. His hand trembled slightly as he set down his coffee cup. "Of course. That's why I need someone experienced to review our procedures." "I appreciate the offer," I said, standing up to signal the conversation was over. "But I've already committed to other consulting opportunities. You'll see the details at the board meeting." He left quickly after that, probably to report back to his father that their former VP knew more than they'd hoped. Monday morning, July 15th, arrived clear and warm. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. in the executive conference room on the 8th floor of our Baltimore headquarters. I arrived at 9:30 carrying a leather portfolio that contained copies of my evidence file. The originals were already in federal hands. What the Kades didn't know was that I'd spent the previous 2 weeks coordinating with Special Agent Monica Rodriguez from the FBI's White Collar Crime Unit and Agent Thomas Chun from the DA's Baltimore field office. They'd been building their own case against the distribution network I'd uncovered, but they needed insider evidence to make arrests stick. My documentation provided the missing pieces. At 9:45, I walked into the conference room, where 7 board members sat around the mahogany table. Graham was at the head, looking confident. Riven sat to his right, fidgeting with his iPhone. The mood was tense but controlled. They thought this was going to be a routine dismissal disguised as corporate restructuring. "Gentlemen," Graham began, "we're here to discuss the future operational structure of Meridian and Roake. As you know, we've been transitioning leadership responsibilities," and I interrupted him calmly. "Before we discuss the future, I think the board needs to understand the present situation." I opened my portfolio and placed the first document on the table, a shipping manifest for a delivery to Richmond showing industrial quantities of acetyl chloride, a fentanyl precursor consigned to a family clinic that had been closed for 6 months. This delivery was approved by Riven 3 weeks ago. I said the receiving facility doesn't exist. The payment was processed through a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. The cargo was diverted to a warehouse in Petersburg, Virginia that's currently under DEA surveillance. The room went dead silent. Graham's confidence evaporated. Riven's face went pale. I continued placing documents methodically. Bank records showing inflated shipping payments, GPS tracking data proving route diversions, email communications discussing special arrangements, photographs of suspicious delivery locations. Each piece of evidence built toward an inescapable conclusion. Over the past 5 months, I explained Meridian and Roake has processed approximately $11.5 million in fraudulent transactions connected to synthetic opioid distribution. The operation spans Virginia, Kentucky, and New Mexico using our legitimate logistics infrastructure to move precursor chemicals and launder drug proceeds. Board member Robert Hayes, a longtime friend, stared at the documents in horror. "Cassian, are you absolutely certain about these allegations?" I'm certain enough to have spent the last week briefing federal agents, I replied. In fact, they're here today to verify my findings. As if on cue, the conference room door opened. Special Agent Rodriguez and Agent Chin walked in, badges displayed, followed by 4 additional federal officers. The board members sat frozen as the agents took positions around the room. Riven Kade, Agent Rodriguez announced, "You're under arrest for conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, money laundering, and racketeering. You have the right to remain silent." Riven didn't resist. He couldn't. The shock had paralyzed him completely. As the handcuffs clicked into place, he looked at me with a mixture of hatred and disbelief. Graham tried to maintain control. "This is outrageous. We demand to see warrants. This is harassment based on the delusions of a disgruntled employee." Agent Chen handed him a document. "Federal arrest warrant signed this morning by Judge Patricia Morgan. We also have search warrants for your corporate offices, warehouse facilities, and personal residences." The meeting that was supposed to end my career had become the moment that ended theirs. The aftermath was swift and devastating. Within hours of Riven's arrest, federal agents had seized Meridian and Roake servers, frozen corporate bank accounts, and cordoned off 3 warehouse facilities as crime scenes. Graham Kade was taken into custody that same afternoon as he tried to board a private jet at Baltimore Washington International Airport, apparently heading for a non-extradition country. The media coverage was immediate and brutal. Baltimore logistics firm used for multi-million-dollar drug operation dominated the evening news. Father-son duo arrested in synthetic opioid conspiracy made front pages across Maryland. My name appeared in several articles, but only as a longtime company executive who provided crucial evidence to federal investigators. The board meeting that morning had lasted exactly 47 minutes. After the arrests, the remaining board members sat in stunned silence for nearly 10 minutes before Robert Hayes finally spoke. "We need emergency legal counsel and a crisis management firm now." I gathered my documents, closed my portfolio, and stood to leave. "Gentlemen, you'll find detailed transition notes in my office. The company's legitimate operations are thoroughly documented. I suggest you focus on salvaging what's left of Meridian's reputation." As I reached the door, Hayes called out, "Cassian, we had no idea. You have to believe that." I turned back briefly. "I know, Robert. That's why I documented everything separately. The evidence clearly shows who knew what and when. The innocent have nothing to worry about. Walking out of that building for the last time felt like shedding 30 years of weight I hadn't realized I was carrying." The legal proceedings unfolded exactly as I'd anticipated. Riven's defense attorney tried to paint him as a naive heir manipulated by criminal associates, but the evidence I collected told a different story. Email records showed him personally negotiating with drug suppliers, approving fraudulent transactions, and threatening warehouse workers who asked too many questions about unusual shipments. Graham's situation was even worse. As the CEO, he bore ultimate responsibility for the company's operations, and the encrypted communications I'd uncovered proved his active participation in the conspiracy. His lawyers attempted to negotiate a plea bargain, but federal prosecutors had enough evidence to pursue maximum penalties. The trial lasted 6 weeks, concluding in November 2024. I testified for 3 days, walking the jury through the logistics operation I built, and explaining exactly how the Kades had corrupted it for criminal purposes. The defense tried to attack my credibility, suggesting I had fabricated evidence out of revenge for being passed over for promotion. "Mr. Drummond," Riven's attorney asked during cross-examination, "isn't it true that you were angry about not receiving the promotion you felt you deserved?" I kept my response simple and factual. I was disappointed by the decision, yes, but I would have been satisfied with a promotion going to any qualified candidate. What concerned me were the operational irregularities that followed. Irregularities that turned out to be criminal activity. "So you admit this investigation was motivated by personal grievance?" "The investigation was motivated by professional responsibility. When you spend 30 years building something, you don't want to see it destroyed by criminal negligence, regardless of who's in charge." The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts for both defendants. Riven was sentenced to 14 years in federal prison, without possibility of parole, for the first 7 years. Graham received 18 years and a $4.2 million fine. The court determined his leadership role, and attempts to flee the country warranted the enhanced penalty. Meridian and Roake lost 87% of its market value within 6 months. The company was eventually acquired by a German logistics consortium for $18 million, about a tenth of what it had been worth before the scandal. Most of the legitimate employees found positions with other companies, and I made sure to provide references for anyone who'd been untainted by the criminal operations. Today, I live in a waterfront townhouse in Annapolis, about 45 minutes from Baltimore. I work as an independent consultant specializing in corporate compliance and logistics security. My clients include Fortune 500 companies, federal agencies, and international shipping firms who want to ensure their operations can't be compromised the way Meridian's were. The work is selective and well compensated. I typically handle 3 or 4 major engagements per year, each paying between $150,000 and $300,000 for comprehensive security assessments. It's more money than I ever made as a corporate executive, and the work is infinitely more satisfying. Last month, I received formal recognition from the DEA's Corporate Crime Division for my role in exposing the synthetic opioid network. The citation reads, "For exceptional civilian assistance in dismantling a multi-state drug distribution conspiracy and protecting public safety through strategic intelligence gathering and federal cooperation." I've been invited to speak at several conferences about corporate whistleblowing and internal fraud detection. The title of my standard presentation is Silent Vigilance: How Experienced Professionals Can Protect Their Industries from Criminal Exploitation. I'm also working on a book about corporate integrity and strategic decision-making under pressure. The working title is 30 Years of Documentation, a Logistics Executive's Guide to Building Unshakable Evidence. Several publishers have expressed interest, and I expect to complete the manuscript by mid-2025. 3 weeks ago, I received a letter forwarded from my old office. It was from Robert Hayes, the board member who survived the scandal and helped rebuild what remained a Meridian under new ownership. Cassian, he wrote, "I've been thinking about something you said during that final board meeting about documenting everything separately. Looking back, I realize you've been preparing for this possibility long before Riven arrived. You knew that protecting the company might eventually require exposing its leadership. That level of foresight and moral courage is rare in our business. Thank you for doing what was right, even when it cost you everything you built." He was wrong about one thing. It didn't cost me everything I'd built. It cost me everything they corrupted. Sitting on my deck this morning, watching sailboats navigate the Chesapeake Bay, I thought about a conversation I'd had with Patricia Hawkins, the retired DA agent who confirmed my suspicions about the drug operation. She'd asked me how I'd maintained such detailed records for so many years. "Patricia," I told her, "in logistics, documentation isn't just good practice, it's survival. You document everything because you never know which detail will matter when something goes wrong. The difference is that most people document to protect themselves. I documented to protect the integrity of what I was building. That distinction made all the difference. When the Kades tried to destroy what I'd helped build, I had the evidence to destroy them instead." A former colleague wrote to me last month, "Cassian, now I understand why you always said silence isn't weakness, it's preparation. And 30 years taught me that justice works best when it's cold, calculated, and thoroughly documented. The loudest revenge is often the least effective. But when you build your case methodically, present your evidence strategically, and time your actions precisely, you don't need to raise your voice to be heard. You just need to be patient enough to let the truth speak for itself." If you enjoyed this story, like this video and leave a comment telling us what you thought. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell to get alerts for new stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.